This is All India Radio. Please stand by for our next program. This is Delhi. In our national program of talks, tonight we bring you a panel discussion entitled The Story of Vande Mataram. The panelists are Professor Sucheta Mahajan, renowned historian and academician, Jawaharlal Nehru University, Delhi; Akhilesh Jha, civil servant, filmmaker and author; and Anand Chakravarti, media personality, who initiates and moderates the discussion.
Today's discussion is entitled The Story of Vande Mataram, a discussion in which we'll try to trace the oral and, shall we say, the sociological and political history of a song that has been unquestionably the most popular patriotic song that inspired India's freedom fighters through the decades. I'm Anand Chakravarti, and for this talk, I'm in the august company of Mr. Akhilesh Jha, writer, civil servant, filmmaker, and above all, author of a seminal work, Vande Mataram, in the House, on the Records. And of course, Dr. Sucheta Mahajan, renowned historian and professor, Jawaharlal Nehru University. I'll begin with Mr. Jha. Now, for the benefit of listeners, Mr. Jha, your work is seminal in the sense that it talks about the rich oral tradition of recordings of Vande Mataram a few years after its inception, so to say. So will you take our listeners through what has been your finding in this rich oral tradition of Vande Mataram?
Yes, so first, I have tried to mix two things. One is our oral stocks and also my little skill sets in data analytics. So what I have done is I have digitalized all my oral stocks, and I have digitalized the proceedings of the Constituent Assembly debates. And then I have tried to weave around these two sources what happened to our Vande Mataram song. So this book is all about that, give a history of our freedom movement through the oral stocks that is available in our country. And this is very rich. And Dr. Mahajan will agree with me that this source has not been given due credit to for supplementing or complementing whatever has been written till now.
Yeah, but more specifically, a little more about that oral wealth that you've accumulated over the years of research and must be painstaking work. And here we are talking about old recordings, 78 RPM records, and even before that, when you had those sound columns before the recorded discs came into play. When you look at that wealth of music that you have before you, what are your first thoughts on it?
So first thought, in our history books, what we have done is we have given all credit to our mainstream politicians. We were given space in our newspapers, in our history books and all that. Through this book and through this endeavor, what we have tried to do is that we have digitalized those records, and then we have tried to analyze and showcase what was their contribution in our freedom movement. You cannot imagine that if Vande Mataram song were not recorded on different discs and they were not circulated in masses, you will see our gramophone records having captions in all languages, all scripts, Devanagari, Gujarati, Roman, Nastaliq, Bangla, Tamil. So they were meant for being circulated to all our regions of this country. And these records, they actually were considered as the voice of God. That is what Britishers tried to showcase, that this is the tool of sedition. And they tried to prescribe all these endeavors what our musicians were doing. But they played an important role in taking not only Vande Mataram, but all the messages of our leaders, of our nationalist leaders of that time, contributing through their lyrics, their songs, all that. So we have digitalized about 1,000 records till now of such value and importance, that you will see the objects being banned by British government. They banned even a dhoti called Ek Baar Bidai De Ma Ghure Aashi, and that happened in the first decade of last century, 1909. So, and they also proscribed our gramophone records. They proscribed anything which had Vande Mataram or any such sort which were the tool of our freedom movement.
In a sense, there was a bit of an irony there, because I think the companies which were coming in, though there were a couple of Indian companies which started manufacturing or producing this music, there were also British companies, the gramophone company, for instance, who, because of the popularity of these songs, were keen to record them, while the government, on the other hand, was, very wary about those songs gaining popularity. First written in 1870 by Rishi Bankim Chandra Chatterjee, as Sri Aurobindo hailed him as, and introduced into public life for the first time with the publishing of his novel, Anand Math. Dr. Mahajan, your views first. What were the initial objections to Vande Mataram, historically speaking?
Well, let's just get a little bit of the context, right?
Yeah.
Why does this song, which begins as a poem, which Bankim had written just on his own, just 2 stanzas, 12 lines, and he writes it around somewhere between 72 to 75. The reason why I'm stressing 72 is because there is a reference to Sapt Koti in that. And Sapt Koti, 7 crore people, was according to the 1871 census of Bengal Presidency, the population of Bengal Presidency, which of course included Odisha, Bihar, Assam, that whole area under the Lieutenant Governor, was 7 crores. And then Bankim picks it up when he writes Anand Math, and he places it, as it were, at the center, where the song then appears in at least 3 or 4 different contexts as part of the story as it develops around the sannyasi revolt.
Yes.
And that is very interesting, because not only does he place it in that context of the sannyasi revolt, he also, in the later paras which come, where he brings in Durga, and he talks about then the Durga with her 10 weapons of war, and Durga who is, so from the mother, who is painted in a very benign light, you mother of the harvest, you with the land, with the fertility, the first song, Sujalam, Sufalam, Malaya Shitalam, that beauty that is praised. From that, there is a movement to a different image of the mother, a mother who can be assertive, a mother who will fight her, and the word used is foemen in the translation, and also says that we are this mother whom we have placed in the temples, right? Now, this part of it is picked up later on, and interestingly, much, much later, only as late as the 1930s and 1940s, does a real objection come when it is picked up by the Muslim League, and the objection is to what is called the idolatry.
Idolatry, yes.
The idolatry in the song, the idol worship. And here again, a very important thing to keep in mind is that Bankim was personally against idol worship. In fact, Sabyasachi Bhattacharya, in his book called Vande Mataram, The Story of a Song, has brought this out. In fact, almost he belonged to a positivist tradition represented by Auguste Comte, and the whole European sort of thing or influence was also there. But I'm not going into that. The point I'm making here is that there is a difference. And the second part of the song is where the controversy comes. And that controversy, according to me, it was a manufactured controversy, in the sense it was taken up in order with those parties like the Muslim League with a divisive agenda. So they took objection to the singing of Vande Mataram in the schools. And then they took objection to the singing of Vande Mataram, the obligatory singing, as they called it, in the assemblies. So in the central provinces and Berar, which is now Madhya Pradesh, again, there was objection to that. So at that point, the Congress appeals to or turns to Rabindranath Tagore. And Tagore was very instrumental in the popularizing of the whole idea of Vande Mataram, not just Bankim's song, which he did. Tagore was the first to sing it.
Tagore was the first
to sing it at 1896 in the Calcutta session of the Indian National Congress. And I was just reading here while my colleague Akhilesh was talking about the recordings, that a recording by Rabindranath Tagore was brought out by the company called Pathiphone. The copies of those records were destroyed by the police because it was, Vande Mataram became part of the Swadeshi movement and, part of the freedom struggle, and particularly part of the cry of the Biplobis, the revolutionaries.
Yes.
Jugantar, Anushilan, Aurobindo Ghosh, it became a rallying cry. And they destroyed all this, but a copy was saved. From one of the records which survived, copies were made in 1966, and now these are commercially available. So it's very interesting that the way the song evolves and gets an association and a grounding, it gets rooted in the freedom struggle. It's imbued with a certain meaning. Aurobindo Ghosh is one of those who really popularizes it. Interestingly, they are saying Muslims don't believe in idol worship. There is talk here of Durga and slaying her enemies. So this is something that we don't like. And Tagore, interestingly, said, well, only the first two paras are fine, they have no problem. But the problem comes because these paras got placed in Anand Math, which had a certain orientation. So because of that placement, it got a certain religious context. So the controversy was about the last stanzas, the second part of it, and to the whole image of Durga, the mandirs, the foes, etc., that it has an implication that this is anti-Muslim. And what I find very disturbing is that even today, by that I mean even 10, 20 years ago, we have had objection to this song by many people on this ground. Obligatory singing of it is something which upsets or violates Articles 28 brackets 1 and 28(3) of the Constitution of India. So till today, this song is brought up. And, whenever there is a need for a divisive agenda, it becomes a flogging horse on both sides. So it is very unfortunate because, according to me, it is a song which had a very different meaning, a very different association. It was a song of patriotism. It was in the form of a vandana, a paean
to the motherland.
To the motherland. Bankim was not the only one. There were others. Rabindranath Tagore, at that time, who was making that beautiful map of India, which was Bharat Mata. So Ravi Verma, if you look at that time, So this was a whole age of cultural renaissance when the motherland was being conceived in this way. And Bankim's song was part of, I would say, that imagination of this nation in the making.
And that brings me to Akhilesh, and I quote from your book before I pose you that question. In your book, early on you say, but when the first glimpses of freedom became visible on the road of the freedom movement, leaders started compiling the grammar of governance, which had powerful filters, and how qualified we were to draft a constitution of quality. And this is a quote from your book. Now, it would seem, Akhilesh, that you almost, in a way, tacitly admit, if I may say so, that the grammar of governance is a compelling factor.
Yeah, but just taking a clue from Dr. Mahajan when she was giving us a beautiful backdrop of all this, again, drawing clues from gramophone records, you will see there were two kind of responses. There was a response from Pandit Vishnupant Pagnis, who was from Maharashtra.
Yes.
And there was a response from Jaganmay Mitra, who was from Bengal. So what Jaganmay Mitra, Sur Sagar, did was that he just sang Vande. He just avoided Mataram. And this beautiful composition of Vande Mataram. It starts with Vande Mataram, but all through he just sings Vande so that there is no controversy. And people can accept and appreciate the feelings behind song, that legacy that we all were inheriting. And the other response was from Vishnupant Pagnis. What he did was, he sang the stanzas which were proscribed or were avoided first, and then he sang the first two stanzas, right? So Congress tried to counter the Muslim League, this thing. When Jinnah came back from London, from that isolation that he has self-imposed, pressure from Liaquat Ali Khan, this all started. Before that, you see, I'll just invoke Qazi Nazrul Islam. Most of the famous Shyama Sangeet were written, composed, set to tune by Qazi Nazrul, right?
Yes.
We belong to that land.
Yes.
We had a composer called Master Jamal who sang Vande Mataram and,
Yes.
and who was arrested for singing Vande Mataram. Then, if you see Vande Mataram in three phases. First, partition of Bengal to First World War, or take it up to 1921. And then from 21 to Second World War. And then from Second World War or Constituent Assembly debate to... So we'll see then first phase of Vande Mataram, we'll see people singing as a song of devotion, which was the culture of Bengal. And you will see only Bengalis singing this. And they were all released from Calcutta. In second phase, you see people from Maharashtra, people from other parts of country, they started singing Vande. They were all accepting it as a song of national consciousness. And then third phase, Vande Mataram coming as a probable national anthem. So you see the same kind of rhythm being used in all three phases. Congress's approach was rightfully a constitutional building program. So they wanted to create an atmosphere where everybody was comfortable, unlike Muslim League. Even after Constituent Assembly proceedings, when it started, even then they were hopeful that Jinnah will come on table and we'll have the same Constituent Assembly and we'll have a united India and all that. So I think our statesmen have always shown a good path. And they have always set a good standard of discussion, whether it was in Constituent Assembly or in public meetings.
One thing I cannot probably deny is the fact that whenever this issue was brought up in the Constituent Assembly, and that is one of the main treatises of your argument, that somehow or the other, the debate or a discussion on Vande Mataram was avoided.
As I mentioned in my initial reference to this book, that when this Constituent Assembly assembled first in December 1946, and when we had our last session in 1950, this whole period, the total time devoted was less than half an hour. Precisely 1785 seconds. So that is less than 30 minutes. And the total discussion that was allowed or was responded by the President of Constituent Assembly was less than 9 minutes. So you can imagine that this question was not only deflected or avoided, but there was some decisions which were actually taken before this House could discuss or own this topic up. And I'll just invoke some of the members, this thing like Mr. H.V. Kamath. from the very first day of his bringing this topic to House to the last day, he fought that we should discuss, but we should have a committee. Like we had a committee for flag.
For the national flag.
And we all know that before independence, that flag was adopted by the House. Many people, Shibbanlal Saxena, then we had Madhav Rao, we had Chaudhry Ranbir Singh from Haryana, then we had Rohini Kumar Chaudhary, we had Lakshminarayan Sahu, then we had Satish Chandra Samanta. There are many of them, Suresh Chandra Majumdar. They all try to bring this topic in for the consideration of the House. But every time they were said, this is not the right time.
Dr. Martin, what I keep asking, and which is also mentioned in your book, that some of the great figures of our independence struggle did not seem it pertinent to raise this issue. Do you think they also realized the compulsions of governance, not stoke any further fire?
I can only guess.
Yes.
Because I haven't read the Constituent Assembly debates very carefully on this question. I can only compare it with some other issues, for example, which were not taken up because they could become part of a divisive agenda. So they were put on the back burner. For example, like linguistic reorganization of states.
Yes.
Now that was something which since 1920, a very clear stand on that, Gandhi's new constitution, where they didn't go by the presidencies, but the Congress committees were according to like the language. It was based on language. So Karnataka Pradesh Congress Committee, Odisha Congress Committee, so they didn't go by the administrative divisions. But when independence came, because it brought with it partition, the understanding of the government was that, look, let's not deal with this. There's already enough fire that, we are caught in. So new type of chauvinisms can show their face based on linguistic passions. We've already seen the religious passions which have come up and brought partition. This might lead to kind of, tendencies to fragment the country. So it was put on the back burner. Separate electorates, for example. One would imagine there would have been some issues to do with, again, what do we do about this? And, well, no question of having separate electorates because we don't want partition repeated. You see, that fear of partition-like divisiveness getting now repeated was very much part of the mindset of the rulers. And it's not just an apprehension, it was a reality.
It was a reality.
We were really in a
Yes.
very, very difficult situation.
So sometimes I think in retrospect we get hypercritical about issues and not probably appreciating the circumstances and the exigencies under which a particular decision was made or, compositions were made. I will probably conclude with a quote by Gandhi in 1939 when he wrote in the Harijan, and I quote from his saying, he says, no matter what its source was and how and when it was composed, Vande Mataram had become a most powerful battle cry among Hindus and Musalmans of Bengal during the partition days, which is exactly what we were saying. It was anti-imperialist. As a lad, when I knew nothing of Anand Math or even Bankim, its immortal author, Vande Mataram had gripped me. When I first heard it sung, it had enthralled me. I associated the purest national spirit with it. It never occurred to me that it was a Hindu song or meant only for Hindus. Unfortunately, now we have fallen on evil days. And I think, all said and done, that speaks of the sagacity of Gandhi, who understood and appreciated what it was about, and yet there's a profound regret about what has happened to Vande Mataram in the course of the political discourse. We've had a great discussion, and I must thank you, Ms. Mahajan and Akhilesh, for enlightening this discussion with your scholastic understanding of the subject. And it's been an honor participating in this discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Vande Mataram, Vande Mataram.
In our national program of talks tonight, you were listening to the panel discussion entitled The Story of Vande Mataram. The panelists were Professor Sucheta Mahajan, renowned historian and academician, Jawaharlal Nehru University, Delhi; Akhilesh Jha, filmmaker, author and civil servant; Anand Chakravarti, media personality, who moderated the discussion. Produced and presented by Naveen K. Gupta, this program came to you from the AIR Live News Channel 24/7 of All India Radio.